I graduated from Western, I moved to Toronto, and then I worked in restaurants, in kitchens for like over a year because I just had no idea what to do. And I didn't know how to apply for work because I didn't know how to take what I had done in university and transfer it into this like business environment. What's funny is that my first career type job came through anthropology, but it wasn't an anthropology job. When I went to Western, I had a friend named Matt who ended up going to do his master's at Trent. And he met a woman there who was working for this company in Toronto. And she was also previously in anthropology, but got out of it or moved out of it. And her company was hiring. And so, kind of through that connection, I got hired in this company that is now called LifeWorks, that was called Morneau Chappelle at the time, in a business intelligence department. I had no idea what that was. One of the ways that it's kind of funny how anthropology helped me. So, not only did it get me in the door because of this connection, but I remember in that interview, it was, business intelligence, which is like data and reporting and data analytics. And I didn't really know that stuff. And I remember the manager asking me, like, what databases are you familiar with? Meaning like data databases. And I thought of research databases because that's all I knew. So I was like, I don't know, like JSTOR and like whatever the ones were that I was using for research. And it was really great because she wasn't technical. So she was like, oh, that's very impressive. So it kind of worked to my advantage. And then I ended up working there for 7 years and then now work at TELUS. So throughout that whole career, right now I work as a senior project manager at TELUS, I should say, but we might get into it a bit more, as Andrew said, but through all of that, including the first job that I was absolutely terrified to have because I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't really know the norms of working in a business culture of what to do. But what I did know is how to find out information. That was like a key thing that being a undergrad really taught me, was that the answers out there, whether it's doing research yourself, talking to people, I always just had that confidence that I would eventually figure it out in one way or another. And I think that ultimately is a trait I still carry with me that really, really helps.
Thrilled to be here. I've participated in a number of these events before at U of T, but I'm delighted to have the invitation from Western because I do think of my time at Western with a special feeling in my heart. I had a great time in the anthropology department there, so I'm very glad to be here. So thank you for that. I think I'm a bit strange because I grew up with an aunt who was an archaeologist. She doesn't work in archaeology anymore. So I had very early exposure to archaeology and what archaeologists do and how they think. And so I decided sort of at an early age that sounded really cool. I loved working outdoors. And, I thought the idea of doing some field work and some lab work was pretty cool. So I went into my undergrad thinking that, I would pursue archaeology ultimately. And just by chance during my undergrad, I had the opportunity to work with human remains from an archaeological site. I was working as like an office assistant for a cultural resource management firm, and they said, we need some help with this project. And so I became involved in working with human remains, and I found that skeletal biology was very interesting in the context of answering questions about how people lived in the past. And so that really sparked my interest. And I ended up pursuing graduate degrees at the University of Toronto, a master's and PhD in biological anthropology. But I think of myself more as a bioarchaeologist. So I'm not interested so much in human evolution or in skeletal biology specifically, but in how that can be applied to answer interesting questions about how people live their lives and that relate to archaeology and culture history. I worked for a while in cultural resource management off and on while I was doing my graduate degrees. And, there's, it's a tough living doing that. You don't make a lot of money. It's long hours and it requires a lot of passion. Ultimately, I really thought that I would end up being a professor. I went through and I completed those advanced degrees, but my timing was totally off. The economic downturn in 2008 had happened just before I finished my PhD, and the tenure track positions were drying up, and I found myself sort of hopping from job to job teaching at colleges and universities sessionally. And that's also a real grind. So I was traveling all over Southern Ontario, trying to make ends meet. And I knew I wanted to have a family. I wanted to stay here in Toronto, and that lifestyle just wasn't doing what I wanted it to. And so a friend of mine suggested that I apply for a job with the provincial government in their archaeology program unit. So reviewing the work of the licensed archaeologists, who I had worked with basically all throughout my graduate degrees. So I was kind of sitting on the fence about it. And when I applied, I was 9 months pregnant. So like very obviously pregnant. You can't hide something like that. And I didn't get that job initially, but they called me back 7 months later and said, would you be interested in a 5-month contract? And I said, well, 5 months is better than any of the colleges and universities are offering me right now. So I took it, and within 9 months, I was made permanent in that position, and I moved around within that unit of subject matter experts in archaeology specifically, and having the background in human remains really helped because they didn't have anyone with that expertise. So I did that for a little bit, and then I decided that I wanted to try something different. So I went on what's called a secondment. So within government, you can move, you can keep your permanent position where you first entered the public service, and you can try out different jobs while keeping your home position. So I went on a secondment to the Center of Forensic Sciences as a policy and program analyst, and I did that for about 1.5 years until what I'm doing now, which is what I thought of as my dream job, to be honest. When I think back to it, I'm the registrar of burial sites for the provinces. I also administer the provisions of the Funeral, Burial, and Cremation Services Act that relate to cemetery closures and abandonments. So my responsibilities are to make sure that people are complying with the law around the way that they approach human remains, both within and outside of known cemeteries. So my work right now, I work very closely with Indigenous communities. Obviously, maybe you've discussed it in this class or others, but there's the residential schools burial sites issue, which has been in the news and is getting more attention recently, which is good. So I'm involved in efforts around that. And I don't think I imagined that I could ever get here. And it certainly wasn't the path that I thought I would walk, but life is surprising. And I think in my case, I tried to seize the opportunities and just take a chance and apply to things, because you never know what will happen. And in my case, I failed a bunch of times, but ultimately, those failures helped me to pause and think about what it was I really wanted. So I still work in anthropology, I would say, but in an applied context.
Hi, I'm also very pleased to be here. It's really lovely to talk to students again. I don't get to do it as much as I would like to anymore. So I'm a bioarchaeologist as well. It kind of depends on who I'm talking to. I might say bioarchaeologist, I might say anthropologist, depending on who knows what the level of knowledge they have. I started at U of T for my undergraduate degree, and I started in life sciences. I thought I was going to do, DNA, something. And then I took an anthropology class because I didn't get much in high school actually on it, but I always loved history and science. And so I took this anthropology first level class and loved it, and then didn't do as well in chemistry as I thought I was hoping to do. So that kind of stymied, I guess, my path into continuing that. So I to change my major, and I did a double major in biological anthropology and archaeological sciences at U of T, and I loved it. I went on to do a master's at Western, and I loved that. I loved my time at Western as well. And I think similarly to Crystal, I thought, oh yeah, I love research. This is for me. I want to go on and keep researching and work in a university. Similarly to Crystal, I graduated after I went on to do my PhD in England at Durham University, and I finished in 2014 officially. I came home to Canada in 2013, 5 months pregnant with our first child, and finished my thesis and got that all sorted and had a small baby, and then realized, oh wait, I can't do what I thought I was going to do. So now what? So it was a bit of a process to get to, what I'm doing today. So what I'm doing today is I work with an organization called Prime Earth, which is my friend Jackie Prime's organization. She is a primatologist. I ran into her at an event in Burlington that had nothing to do with anthropology. It was an Earth Day event. I was there with my kid and we started chatting, and we had similar ideas, and we both thought that, to avoid this kind of crash post grad school, that maybe we could help other students avoid that. And we created, with some funding from the Canadian Association for Physical Anthropology, a program we call ACE, and it's a professional development program specifically for biological anthropologists, grad students right now mostly, or recent grads. And that's an ebook. We do virtual office hours, and it's been about a year since launch, and we're really loving the office hours. People are finding it really helpful, and I see at least one familiar face on the screen, so I'm really excited about that. So we do that. I also, I've been editing for a long time. This is one of those things I actually started when I was a teenager, from my dad, and it just has been one of these things that I've done off and on throughout my various degrees, just for money. And I like it well enough, but now I'm editing a local newspaper that is online for Burlington, Ontario. And it's actually pretty fun. I get to put snarky editor's notes on articles when I feel the need, and kind of gathering interesting ideas for stories and all that. And anthropology, it does help with that, the sort of sensitivity issues, the cultural sensitivity, making sure things are worded in a way that is palatable for everyone and doesn't offend. So it comes in really handy there. I also do some community work. I'm involved in it's an organization that we're calling PACE. It's for older adults. I'm really tired. I have a 6-month-old as well, so my brain doesn't always go as quickly as I'd like it to. But anyway, so it's for older adults. It's healthcare, it's social stuff, it's wellness, it's all this kind of stuff. There's a pilot project in Burlington right now, and anthropology has been really, really helpful for that, in terms of looking at the data we collect, in terms of, even finding questions on surveys around quality of social interactions and quantity and all these little details. It's been really helpful. The healthcare aspect, because my expertise is in the human skeleton, but more broadly, I have the ability to understand the healthcare context. So it's been helpful for that too. So that is what I do right now, a bunch of stuff, and also while I'm at home with a baby. So that's the long and the short of it right now. I can jump in there if you guys are having anything. I think really broadly, the understanding of humans. Be that in your personal interactions with colleagues or the actual work you're doing, it's been really important. And then a lot of what I do is it doesn't have it. What I do now has clearly nothing to do with the aging rate of the human skeleton across different populations, which was the work I did for my PhD. The stuff I use every day is the broader expertise around, the fact that we're all human, we have similarities and differences, and that empathy towards other people, understanding that, and the different social context has, will affect people's lives. So socioeconomics, the biology, all that stuff is the interrelationship. So I think from your anthropology undergraduate degree, you get that, you get the idea that there's an interrelationship between, you know, your social status, your health, your, you know, everything. So I think that's been really important throughout.
I can tell you a bit about how I've used anthropological skills. I think having a background in anthropology has been one of the most useful things in the workforce. So there are a number of stories I have. The first was when I went in sort of for an informal interview at the Center of Forensic Sciences for that policy and program analyst interview or position. And it was informal. It was more like a chat, but one of the first questions they asked me was, do you know what a workforce assessment is? And I said, no. And they said, so you've never done one before? And I'm like, no. And they're like, well, this is the major project that we want you to do. And they said, here's what it involves. We want to know about the composition of our workforce, about our staff and managers, and so that we can do long-term strategic planning around, you know, how many staff we're going to need, the resources we'll need, about the generations and the way they work together in the workplace. And they said, so, you know, understanding that, where would you start in terms of completing that kind of project? And like, without missing a beat, I said, well, the first thing you do is you talk to people. You sit down and you have meaningful conversations with them about their work and their experiences. And I think that, you know, I was in with senior managers, and I don't think that's the typical response that they get, that you go straight to the workers and have a discussion about what they think and feel, rather than, you know, consulting managers about how their teams are functioning, or looking at outputs of data about productivity, for example. Or doing lots of text-based research about the future of work. And all of those things are incredibly important. But from my perspective, if you're not talking to the people who are doing the work and understanding their lived experiences of being in the workplace together, then you're missing the point. And that's a very anthropological perspective, I think, and one that I don't think, I'm not sure that I would have arrived at that without, you know, the education that I got at Western. And I think the real benefit of a department like yours that you're going through is that it does have a 4-field focus. And so while my you know, academic interests were in biological anthropology and archaeology, I took so many sociocultural anthropology courses, and I even continued that into grad school. I took some medical anthropology courses as well. And just that breadth of knowledge about people and what they need and who they are and how they live and work together is just so foundational to understanding the modern workplace. And so, you know, that's a skill that I was able to sell. And I do think I got that job on the strength of that approach. So you know, I'm no longer in that position at the moment, but I think that's a good example of how anthropological thinking can help you to succeed in the workplace and in a business environment.
Yeah, I can quickly just top up on what others have said. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with everything Jen and Crystal have already shared, but the two things that stick out for me are writing skills. So I remember having to just write so many essays, which I didn't always love doing, but I can see how that's really made my life so much easier in the work that I do, because there's so much communication that happens through writing. So specifically related to my job, I sometimes have to create like user manuals or document processes, or you know, even write out project plans that are clear and concise. And that's something that I can see a lot of my colleagues struggle with, and it's a lot easier for me. And I'm positive it has to do with the fact that I've had to do so much writing in the past. The other thing that's related to that is one of the skills I find very hard to find in the work that I do are people who are a very good bridge between like a technical team and a non-technical team. So for example, right now I work at TELUS. I sometimes work with, say, like a sales team and then a team of engineers. The sales team doesn't have the same knowledge as the engineers do. And often people who are very technical have a hard time speaking in a way that doesn't require a certain level of knowledge already. And I think I again am positive it's something that I got out of just being able to collect so much information and then distilling it to, this is what my audience needs to know, whether it's in a paper or in a conversation, and being able to communicate it effectively to the audience that I'm speaking to. That's a feedback I've gotten both at my previous job and then now at TELUS. So it's not something that lots of people can do. And I really think it gives you a huge leg up in the workforce if you're able to communicate effectively, especially when it comes to sort of the specialized knowledge that a lot of people have a difficult time communicating.
I really like that question. It's really cool. I think yes. I mean, I've always loved reading, and I do. I mean, I purposely seek out books. I mean, I do read some nonfiction, but fiction. I certainly want to seek out other perspectives other than my own, because that's what makes life interesting. You know, knowing more. That's why I love anthropology. It's knowing more about other people and how other people live. And I've always, you know, I love traveling, and in between my undergrad and my master's degree, I had 2 years off in between those degrees. And mostly I worked, but also I went traveling, and I got to see Southeast Asia and loved it. And seeing it, I think there's kind of this interplay between, you know, loving anthropology and being into that, and then going out and having more experiences, and it goes back and forth a little. You learn more about other people, and then you want to keep learning and understanding more. So I think there's that. And I think it's, I mean, I think, I guess I have a little job story as well. I ended up, again, this is partially through networking. I ended up working at a hospice in Burlington, Carpenter Hospice, not with residents because I'm not trained for that, but I was hired to be the project lead for something called Compassionate City Burlington. And it was this project all around normalizing death, dying, loss, bereavement, these cycles of, you know, life and death, aging, and all this stuff. And it was really cool. And I got that job through through just an initial informational interview. There was no job at that point. But the executive director started telling me about their project, and I just got all excited because, again, it's all these things that I'm super interested in. I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. This is so cool. The anthropology fits right in because we learn about death in this culture and in that culture. And I get a little excited about stuff sometimes. So I basically just did that. And the executive director then kind of fed off that energy and got really excited too. And then I ended up doing a panel for them for an event. It was there's an artist called, I think his last name's Burke. He's from an art family, and he did a photographic exhibits in Grimsby, and it was around death and dying. And so they had me as like an expert on the panel. It was really fun. And then the job actually did come up maybe, I want to say, a year later. And of course they remembered me, and I got that job through that avenue because I'd done the event and they remembered me. So yeah, I mean, the point is all these interests sort of play into how you interact with people and how you talk about these things and the things you consume and do for fun. So yeah, I think it's all in there.
Yeah, I can maybe share. That is a really great question. It certainly made me think about the things I do that are creative. So I do a lot of work. What's really nice about working for a company like TELUS, which is really big, but also is very committed to sort of social justice type of activities within Canada, is that there's lots of ways to volunteer within the company that then branches out into the community. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about is working with our women's employee resource group. So we put on different events, and we often work with different organizations in the community to organize events as well. So we had just recently, we did I put on a workshop on personal branding, but it was with this organization called New Circles in Toronto that is mostly for women who are newcomers to Canada looking for work. And so to do a personal branding for people who are talking about personal branding, or even just how to use that in your job for people who maybe aren't even familiar with the Canadian workforce and sort of the norms here. It took a lot of creativity for me to think about it. I probably at the time didn't tie it back to anthropology, but for sure now thinking about it, as Jen and Crystal have both mentioned, just having that human perspective allows me to bring that to the table in these creative endeavors. And there's another committee I'm a part of that's looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility within our company, within our teams. So there's a lot of creativity that I get to have on my role there, and everything from writing articles to doing interviews to sharing information, building out websites, all sorts of things. And I think that my background, again, that human perspective, of course, it ties into how I see how do we build an inclusive environment that is equitable, and we're thinking about these things. So I'm really glad you asked that question, because I never would have thought about it, but I really do see a really strong correlation between the things I do creatively and then how anthropology and then my background in it supports it.
I can speak a little bit about this. I had to really think hard. That's a good question. In terms of like personal creativity, I'll confess that I don't have a lot of time to do as many creative things as I would like. One thing I do like to do is when I have time, write short stories. And one of the ones that I'm working on now is a story about the G8, G20 meetings that were in Toronto, and I was part of the group that was protesting it, back in the day, and so I think in that case, an anthropological perspective has helped me, because when you think about the way that that event has been portrayed in the media, when you think about the construction and the othering of people who have opinions that are different than the dominant narrative about how great capitalism is, anthropology provides some really great tools for critiquing that and for examining it. And I think for me, it was kind of startling, the lived experience and the reality of being in that situation and being vilified for something that, I don't necessarily think was, protesting is part of our right as citizens. And for the most part, it was peaceful, but it was painted with this brush, that there was something evil or, essentially bad about it. And I think examining those narratives carefully is, again, something that anthropology does well. We're thinking about like the group dynamics that lead to the type of behavior. So either thinking about, the media portrayal, the systems that underlie that, or the police actions in a situation like that where they were kettling people. And so that's sort of a way that I use anthropology. Like anthropology doesn't stand outside of who I am anymore. It is just a lens through which I see the world, and I can't avoid it no matter what I do. It's like, it's a hat that's stuck on your head, and it's good that I like it. In terms of like a professional application of that, I think like a commitment to social justice, and a commitment to empathetic citizenship, right? So starting from a position of not assuming that you're always in the right, that other people have perspectives that are just as valid as yours are, and that perhaps it's incumbent upon you to do the work to find the value in the things in their perspective. Let's say that's a core anthropological, like the idea of cultural relativism, basically. And I've applied that in my work life as well. So following the murder of George Floyd, I was running a team of staff that just sort of off the side of our desk, we were functioning as a wellness team. And many of the staff were expressing that they were finding it hard to focus and get work done after, with all the media coverage around George Floyd and the, events that were happening here in Canada as well. And so, a friend of mine brought this up in one of the meetings, and she's a racialized person. And I said, well, isn't there something that we can do in the workplace to give people sort of an opportunity to come to terms with it, not individually, but sort of as a group? And so we started this, what we called it an anti-racism committee. And we got permission from the senior leaders to start having just open-ended conversations about race and ethnicity in the workplace, and how it impacts what we do and how we do it, the services that we provide as public servants, and the way that we relate to each other in the workplace. And that kind of a project of just getting people together in a room to talk on a regular basis, I think is informed by anthropological thinking, that getting people together and that togetherness, the way to form the kind of culture that we want at work is to get people together in the same room talking about their issues and their experiences and sharing stories. Really, I think that stories are often at the heart of what anthropologists do so well, whether in any of the sub-disciplines. They tell stories about people that are compelling and that reveal things about who we are and where we've been and where we're going. So that's a long-winded answer to the question about creativity, but
I'm going to turn it over to you to answer.
Do we ever really know for sure that it's going to work? I think you have to have hope. I mean, life is always going to throw stuff at you. That is 100% true. And I mean, if we don't mind doing the personal stuff, I mean, I'll tell you, I was working at that Compassionate City Burlington job for 5 months, and then I got diagnosed with colon cancer. Your life implodes. And this is not, I'm sorry, I know that's not anthropology related, but it's just finding your way through these situations. So, I mean, you always you got to hold on to that hope, because that's so important in whatever the hard thing is. And, for me, it was the colon cancer for a while there, and I'm super lucky. I'm good now, but you always must hold on to hope and finding your community to help you through that. Find your people and they will help you, because you will get through it. You're going to be all right. Like all of you, we're going to be all right. It might not look like what you think it's going to look like, for sure. I mean, my life has not, but it's cool. You got to embrace those good and bad. So that's my high level philosophical answer. Does anyone have a more specific one?
I've got a few thoughts. So I think one of the most important things is just to have the courage to explore new things, even if you don't think it's something that you necessarily want to do, to just try it and see. Because what will happen, even if you're doing something you don't like, there's learning to be had there, and there's experience that you gain that you can speak to in something like a job interview. And having diverse experiences is definitely something that employers are looking for. If you have a variety of different skills, that is, golden. It's so marketable. And I liked, Jen, what you said about finding your people, because for me, that's the way I found my people. Even if I was in a job that I didn't like, I would find others who are kind of like me. And then we would all, complain together. And eventually we move on to other jobs, and all of a sudden, people here, there, and everywhere, because you've dispersed from this place that you maybe necessarily didn't like. It's through talking with them about your experiences with your people that you do actually find new opportunities and new jobs. So I think if I hadn't been complaining with my best friend about how little I enjoyed driving all over southwestern Ontario. I loved teaching, but I hated, the grind of it. And I don't know that she would have suggested that I apply to go into government. And that was ultimately the suggestion that just opened all these doors for me. And so, and I found her through, I had taken a job at a cultural resource management firm initially because, I needed a job. It was in the field, but I was doing mostly clerical work or like menial, like washing artifacts, like not anything super groundbreaking. But if I had said, oh, that's beneath me, I want to be analyzing the artifacts, or I want to lead a field crew, then, I never would have met her. And, like, so the things have a knock-on domino effect. And if you come at them with a positive attitude and an open mind, there are always things that you can learn. And then just talking about what you want openly with others, telling them, I'm not happy here, or this is where I really want to go, then there may be opportunities that they know of that you don't. So so that's what I think of in terms of advice around, I didn't know everything would work out, but there are strategies that you can employ to get where you want to go, even if you don't necessarily know where that is right now. You figure it out as you go along.
And if I can jump in just again, I think exactly what Crystal was just saying, and Zena, I really want to hear what Zena has to say as well. But I think it's also valuable to figure out what you don't like. I mean, you have these experiences, and it's on it exactly like Crystal was saying. Try stuff, talk to people, do all those things, and then when you find the stuff you don't like, that's great. Then you have a boundary you can set. Or if you have a really terrible job, you can figure out where your limit is for, yes, I need this money, but where can I go and figure it out in the meantime and to get myself out of here, and what's my sort of upper limit for what I can take. I mean, those are all important things to know.
I would say, first of all, that is so not a silly question. That is a very valid question that I think we all feel sometimes in our lives, but definitely around the time that we're supposed to be these like grown-up people, all of a sudden with careers, it's obviously a very unsure time. So not a silly question at all. I think back to when I was doing as I mentioned, I went to psychology first at King's. The woman who was my thesis advisor for my undergrad, she was also the chair of the psychology department. And she told me then to, whatever you end up doing in life, don't close any doors because you're so sure of your final goal. Because what happens is if you're so concentrated on like, I must be this thing, that opportunities present themselves and you just completely ignore them. And she shared with me that she was actually trained as a classical ballerina, and that's what she thought she would be doing. And then here she was, decades later, the chair of the psychology department at a great university. So whatever road you start walking, it's going to lead somewhere. So having an open mind, as others have said, is so important. And I think the other thing is, what held me back for a very long time is not having a clear answer to the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I feel like often when you talk to career coaches, when you might have a mentor later, that's the first thing people ask is like, look, where do you want to be? And I find that question is just so ridiculous. And I'm really just starting a campaign to abolish it, because that's, again, it's good to have goals. It's good to have ideas of, I think I'm going to do this. This is where my passions are. Of course, you need to have those, but you might not, right? You might just be like, I don't actually know what I want to do. And that was me for a long time, and it really held me back. So my approach now that I try to implement much more in my career, my personal life, is like, what is the next right thing? What is the next available thing? If I look around in my work environment right now, oh, that looks interesting. Like, I'll put up my hand for that, or volunteer positions, as others have mentioned, or talking to people. Like I feel like we put such an emphasis on this long-term view of what our career should be, and it should be this ladder, and then we're climbing it, and everyone's like, sure. And like, that's just BS. No one actually does that. It's very unlikely, and most people don't feel that way. So yeah, I would say like good to have long-term goals, but really staying grounded in like what's the immediate things around me that I can start doing right now that align to my values, as others have said, to my interests. Um, that's what's going to move you forward. And I can definitely say, like others have mentioned, that I can look back on things that happened in the past where I might feel like in the moment I didn't know why that happened, or I didn't want to be at that job, whatever it is. And now I can look back on it and say like, oh, but it's still moved me forward. It still gave me the skill. It still gave me this experience. So yeah, keeping an open mind and trying to be a bit more present versus I have to have this all figured out right now, is key.
Crystal, please.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on that. I think that's a really good point, that you can't predict where it's going to go, and the idea that you can know in 5 years where you're going to be is a bit preposterous right now in this current, job market. I didn't have my first permanent, like grown-up job where I'm employed indefinitely at something until I was 34. So, and then since then, in the 6 years I've been in government, I've held 4 different positions. So the idea that you're just gonna like work your way up in some kind of a linear manner, it's just not a reality for many people anyway, and I think certainly for younger generations. So like getting your mind around that you know what, it's okay to try different things, and some things are going to work out and some things aren't, but it doesn't make you, like a failure as a person to say, I don't know what it is that I'm doing or where I'm going, because most of us, to Xenia's point, like we just don't, we don't know. And that just having the flexibility and the courage to just dive off the deep end into something goes a long way, and to say, I'm going to figure this out as I go along. Like it's not, we shouldn't be judging people negatively for doing that. In fact, that's where the opportunities lie, that willingness to try different things. That's just the environment that we work in now. And what
I think I immediately think back to this woman I met one year on Cortez Island in BC. She was in her 80s, I think. So she'd been retired for a long time, and she was just volunteering at this retreat center because that's just what she wanted to do. And someone asked her that question, like, what do you regret, or what do you wish you had known earlier? And she said, the only thing I wish was that I trusted myself more. And I think that that's just something that I think back to a lot. Like I still sometimes have a lot of doubt and insecurity, and I'm not really sure, I start a new project at work or I take on some new responsibility and I just feel like, a fraud. It still happens. But I think when I was younger, as I mentioned, not having that clear perspective of like, where do I need to be, and really comparing myself to other people, I just didn't trust myself that I knew what was right for me, what felt right, what the decisions were that I needed to make, that I could go after jobs that maybe I felt like I, didn't have the full list of credentials. I don't know if you all know that stat, that especially women tend to not apply for jobs unless they have 90% or more of the skills, whereas for men it's like 50%, they'll just apply. So there's a lot of that. So I kind of feel like, it's difficult to say that it's something that you can just do, but I think there's methods to start to, or I wish I had started to talk to myself in a more like affirmative way, like that I could do certain things that I in my case, because I didn't go to grad school, I think I felt like, oh well, I don't have a master's, that so people aren't going to be interested. And I look back now and I see that there were opportunities that were available to me that I decided I wasn't good enough for. So I wish that, yeah, that I just had more confidence, and like that woman told me, just trusted myself more to know that I could do the really hard things and the new things, and would have been okay.
I think for me, it's kind of that maybe just getting comfortable with change earlier on. So like I said earlier, you never really know what life's going to throw at you. And there's so much we can control, and there's a lot that we can't. It's just kind of managing to distinguish in your head between those two things as well. Because it's not always, I mean, I think I sometimes, I mean, still, and I'm better at reminding myself now that I can't, oh wait, no, that's a thing that I can't control. So let's just let that go. And it's getting to that point, and I can do it a lot better than I used to be able to. So those are I think it's those two things. I get comfortable with change earlier, and then, you know, learn to distinguish between what I could and couldn't control, and let go of the stuff that I can't control and work on the stuff that I can.
On that point, you know, for me, it's the don't be so hard on yourself. You know, I have a tendency toward perfectionism, and it hasn't served me well. And it took me far too long to start dealing with that, and like just try to get rid of that mindset. You know, it's great to want to strive for excellence, but if it's affecting your mental health, if it's affecting your relationships with other people, or if you're not cultivating those because you are so focused in one direction, then it's not serving you the way you think it is. And to that end, you know, your relationships with people are the most important thing. That is 100%, like Jen has said, that is how you get jobs. You know, it's through your relationships with people. And there's all kinds of unfairness around that. But I'll tell you, if you do get a reputation for being someone who is good to work with, if you work well with others, and if you're kind and empathetic, it will open doors for you. And that is one of the number one qualities that I look for when I'm hiring. You know, I want someone that when I go into the office, I look forward to working with them. You know, it's not about the attitude or the struggle. It's about working together toward a shared goal. So so keeping that in mind, that, you know, it's through people that you'll ultimately achieve success in the workplace, in my workplace anyway, in the public service. You know, that's something I wish I had known earlier, that, you know, your merit will get you so far, but the way that you treat people and interact with people, and the feelings that you give to them, the feelings they have about you when you work together, are the things that last, and that'll help you to achieve your goals more so than being dogged in pursuit of them.
I can start us off with this one. I do understand why a lot of people look at networking and think it's kind of this like gross activity where, oh, I'm just asking people for something. But I think there's so many different ways to look at it that don't have to feel that way. And I kind of think that anytime you talk about networking or just building relationships with people, the three things I think about is like coming at it with a curious mind, often coming at it from a place of service, and then ultimately through visibility. So curiosity, meaning that you're not just, because the idea really is that networking isn't for when you don't start it when you need something. You start it just because, and you keep doing it just because you want to have these relationships. You want to know people in your industry or your field, or just people you're interested in. And then you keep those relationships warm so that when you need them, you have them. So I think that's where often that idea comes in, like, oh, I'm looking for a new job, now I have to network. Ideally, what happens is you already have this network of people set up that when you do need a job or you need help, you can just go to the people you know. Oh, I know that Jen's really good at this. I'm just going to contact her, and I'm not coming at her out of the blue asking for a favor. Like, we already have this relationship. So coming at it out of curiosity, meaning like, who is interesting to you, right? So I mean, LinkedIn is kind of the obvious platform that we talk about a lot these days, is trying to follow people, interact with people that you like. What are people posting, right? Like, sometimes people might share an article, like, oh, you find that interesting. Maybe that's when you reach out to someone just to start to build that relationship with them. In terms of service, I found one of the best ways to network is through volunteer work. Is you're not there to network, but it's just going to happen because you end up meeting all these different people. I'm currently on the board for Women in Communications and Technology, which is a national organization. So I'm on the board for the Toronto chapter, but that already, I'm being of service. It is something I'm curious about. And the really nice thing is I'm also meeting all these women from different organizations that now I have in my network. And then again, as I mentioned, I can keep those relationships warm. And the last part about visibility is your network is the way that you can advocate for yourself and how you can be visible and showcase what you're interested in, what you've done, what your accomplishments are. So again, LinkedIn being a very clear example is if you've done something, even if it's, if it's for school that you're proud of, like talk about it on LinkedIn, like show it off, because the way that 80% of how jobs get passed on isn't always because I've told someone I'm interested in a job and then they know someone and they know someone. Within your network, often what happens is that if you have a sort of a good like brand and you're advocating for yourself, you're saying like, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I want to be working on, something opens up and people already are thinking of you. It's not that you're clawing and fighting and trying to get in there. It's like, oh, I don't even have to think about this. I might not even have to post this because I know that this person is already interested and is curious. So I think that's the approach I like to take with networking, that's a lot more kind of organic and just genuine versus I'm just going to reach out to this person because they have a job I want and I'm just going to ask them for a favor. But if you are reaching out to people that you don't know, I think just coming from that place of curiosity of like, not like I really need your help, but I'm just so curious about what you do, or I'd love to just chat a little bit longer or just a little bit about your company or your workplace or whatever it may be. I think that goes a long way.
I think all of that was really super awesome advice right there that you just got. I think to add to it, I think I would say that even if you're not comfortable at first, you can learn it. I mean, for me, I'm a natural introvert, and then I did a lot of customer service throughout, later years of high school and throughout my undergraduate degree. And so I just had to become comfortable talking to people, in all kinds of people who were in all kinds of moods. And you have to kind of keep it together and just smile and nod and whatever. And it was such a valuable learning experience. And I learned I don't really want to do frontline customer service as a career. That's not my thing. But the skills that I got from it were so valuable. And from that, I became just more comfortable talking to anyone. And yeah, that curiosity that, I think probably all of you have that anyway. You're curious about humans. That's why you're taking anthropology. So just extend that to whoever you meet. I mean, it doesn't even have to be, you don't even have to necessarily be talking to people about jobs. I mean, one of my best friends, she was actually my personal trainer at a gym I joined, and that's how I met her. And then we have mutual interests, and she's such an anthropological mind naturally. So it's really interesting. And now she's trying to start up a not-for-profit around for people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And so we've got these connections, that our love of learning and curiosity about people and all of these things. And then some of my connections might be able to help her with that. And you know what I mean? So it's that organic thing that Zenia was saying is so important. And you just never know who is going to lead you to what. I mean, I could never have imagined that meeting a primatologist at a random Earth Day event in Burlington would lead to us developing a really cool program together that, is really fulfilling for us, and we love, and we're super excited about. Like, I never would have known. I was just being nosy. So, be nosy, be curious about people. I think that was really, really great advice.
Yeah, I think curiosity is the key word. If you approach your conversations with people who you'd like to connect with curiosity, and pairing that with listening more than you talk. So making that your priority. And that involves using things like active listening principles. So when someone is saying something to you, pausing before you respond and repeating, sort of paraphrasing back to them what it is that they said to you before you share your thoughts, that can go a long way, and it can sometimes clarify what they mean, or or provide them with an opportunity to say more. And when you let people talk about themselves in a positive way, they'll leave that conversation feeling better than they did before. And that's the kind of relationship that you need to cultivate in the workplace, basically, to get ahead. And it sounds kind of Machiavellian when it's put that way, or diabolical or something, but it's part of being a keen observer of humans and the way that they interact. And if you're putting that positive energy into your interactions, then you're really making the effort to understand where someone's been, and what the circumstances they're under now, or they're working in now, and where they want to go. Then ultimately that's going to do you well in the end, personally or professionally. And to the point about it being gross, I think there can be that perception, and I don't always relish it, but when you find someone that you admire professionally and that you're legitimately interested in, it becomes very easy to ask them questions because maybe you kind of want to be like them. And so there's a sense in which we need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, and that's where the sort of the personal growth happens. And if you're engaging with that on a daily basis, if you're committed to continuously learning and growing as a person, part of that is listening to others and trying your best to understand where they're coming from, and developing relationships with it. May or may not go anywhere. Maybe you do just find a really great friendship out of it, or a great professional working relationship that doesn't lead to jobs. But again, like speaking to what I said before about reputation, if you get known as someone who is good at those skills, that will ultimately open doors for you. So I'd say networking for me is more of a perspective about how to interact with people than it is this sort of targeted conversation where you're trying to get something out of someone else. And I think that speaks to what Xenia and Jen were both saying. Sorry, I have.
Okay.
And anthropologists are everywhere too. You'd be surprised where you can find them. So in my industry, I deal with people in municipalities who are doing jobs that are business related or clerical, and they started out in anthropology, and they're so excited to talk to me. And I'm excited to talk to them. Like, finding people who have sort of the shared anthropological background is exciting. Or even in government, I was redoing one of my business processes and thinking, this isn't working well, I don't like this, I want to redo it. And so I reached out to something called the Behavioral Insights Unit, and they use psychology, sociology, and anthropology in addition to some data, magic, magic with numbers, to help you to rethink the way that you do your business. And I encountered a woman who has a PhD in anthropology, and she was working in that field, basically just helping public servants to think differently about the way their processes work. And one of the things she did for me was she did some ethnography of a certain kind in reaching out to my stakeholder groups to talk to them about their experiences in dealing with government. And so she and I hit it off. But you never know where you're gonna find these people, and it can be in unexpected places.
I think what I would say is this was a really interesting reflection for myself, right? Knowing that I was coming to do this panel, and the fact that I'm not in anthropology at all, and I sometimes think it was just this chapter of my life that was sort of it's gone. But it was so great to see that time I spent at Western. I really enjoyed it, and I sometimes want to just go back and be a student. But I would say that no matter where it ends up leading you, like for me, it led to something completely different. It's still such a valuable time in your life, and it's still, such a valuable gift to give to yourself of going through this like higher education process, because there's just so many amazing skills that you end up gaining out of it. And I very quickly will just say that I know there was a question from someone, Andrew, that you had sent about like soft skills and whether employers value those. And boy, do they ever. Like, they're now often called core skills, because people are starting to realize that technical stuff you can teach someone, but the softer skills of like critical thinking, communication, or communicating effectively, all these things, like that's key. So no matter where it leads you, yeah, you've given yourself a gift and it's going to serve you really well. And it was such a pleasure for me to think about how it has for myself. Thank you so much for having me.
I think from the perspective of work in particular, I think that actually everyone needs an anthropologist, and it's kind of up to us to communicate that to people. And I think you've probably got a good handle on that already from just the questions you were asking that Andrew sent to us. So, anthropology has value, and we can take that out into the world. And I think the other thing I want to say to you all is that, I mean, your time has value. So even when you're connecting with other people with us, and don't come, I think it's hard to sometimes be like, well, you're a student and you're trying to connect with people who are not students anymore. But I just recognizing that we're all human beings. Going back to that anthropological perspective, we're all humans. We're all kind of the same. So remember that your time has value too, and you'll figure it out along the way, even if you're not sure what it looks like now. But it's really fun to talk to you. So thank you for having me.
Because I know, like, my education at Western in anthropology has been instrumental in the success that I have today, and that includes the sort of philosophy of anthropology. Don't be afraid to explore, to be curious, to ask questions, to try new things, to fail, to push yourself outside your comfort zone, to go and live somewhere else, try something new. Those things, that ability to put yourself in an uncomfortable position will offer you benefits in the long term. And I think that's one of the key takeaways from anthropology. And sell those skills that you've got in terms of your anthropological thinking, because they are absolutely in demand. They are 100% core skills in the workplace. And as I said, I'm more interested in the kind of person I'm hiring and the way that they think. And I like anthropological thinking. So, and I feel like there's this recognition that's happening in the workplace that the sort of intangible qualities that people have and their approach to working with others is often more important, as Xenia said, than the actual technical skills. Like, it just it's absolutely a truth, and it's starting to be realized. So yeah, invest in yourselves. Congratulations for choosing anthropology.